So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Super excited for this particular segment, mostly because we got an upgrade from Dave Russell. With Emilee Tellez is joining today, a frequent guest of the program. So, Emilee, first and foremost, thanks for joining for today. You want to remind folks all the goodness that you are and what you do and why you're here for today.
Sure. I am a technologist, part of the Veeam product strategy team, and my focus and my passion is on business continuity and disaster recovery. So I represent, yeah, I know that's Jason's favorite thing as well. So I help to represent, the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator product, part of the Veeam data platform, and talk a lot about why customers should be orchestrating and automating all of their workflows to make their business continuity and disaster recovery planning so much more easier. And good news, that's what we're going to talk about today, right? I
That's right.
hope after this I do get a punch card, though, for being a frequent flyer or guest of these. I think that's something we should look to do.
You're getting almost as much airtime as some of our recurring hosts. So, yes, we can definitely get you a punch card. Your 10th term is free, by the
All
way.
right.
So that'll be fun. Emilee, one of the things I really love about when you join the program, and if you've not seen M's demos from like Veeam on Main Stage and some of the webcast stuff, M comes from the real world, right? So, frontline as a former engineer, actually helping some of our largest customers with goals like business continuity and disaster recovery. So I love that real worldness that you bring. I would like to think 15 years ago, I was bringing that real worldness, and I have been stuck in a little box ever since. So again, thank you for joining. So what we're going to talk about today, this is actually one of the last episode components for the Data Protection Trends 2024 series. Let me remind folks, we'll bring up the screen. So this is the fifth year that this report has come out in its core curation, which is where Dave Russell and I, both former analysts, got involved with Veeam and started working with this data. This last entry is one of the largest in the industry as far as data protection trends overall. So far, we've covered macro trends, we've covered digital transformation, long-term retention, we've covered cloud strategies, container strategies, some realizations on cyber, right? Lots of things, but one of course, our favorite topics is disaster recovery, right? So how does that look overall? And when you were culling through the data protection trends report for this year, we added, in fact, part of your feedback was adding a few extra questions around what folks are doing from an overall holistic BC or DR perspective. One of the questions was around what's in the plan. So can you break this one down for us, and then let's kind of riff on it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are some of the things, right, that I've always was curious about, especially when I was talking to different types of customers or even partners, right, where you're working with somebody that's going to help you to build out what your strategy is going to look like for,
Sure.
again, business continuity or disaster recovery, right? Those two things could be the same, or they could be very much so very different depending on the business, right, and what you're trying to keep available. So one of the questions was, the elements are within your organization's published BCDR plan. What do you focus on the most, right? And I think the first thing, or the top two pieces that we got from the respondents, was including cyber events as part of the type of disaster, which is no surprise there, right? We've been saying
Right.
this for about 3 years now, that cyber is definitely a type of disaster. You need to have a plan for it, especially when it comes to getting your data available. The second was subscribing to some type of disaster recovery as a service provider. So leveraging DR as a service. And if you start to think about this, this really comes down to a process. So these are going to be, how do we include some type of process within our BCDR planning, so that way we are ensuring that we're engaging with the right resources, the right technology, the right service providers, so that way we know that we can either accomplish our BCDR strategy or can work towards the goal of maintaining that SLA.
So one of the things I like about what you drew out as the top line is you get a why and a how right out of the box, right? So certainly, we talk a lot about cyber is a disaster. It's not the only disaster. We'll talk more about that a little bit later in the program. But I love the fact that I honestly, I think these 1,200 respondents this year, I think they got it right. Right. The top thing they ought to be thinking about is that cyber should be holistically part of it. The one thing that I would offer for the folks at home when you're thinking about this, and I've been doing DR a long time. It used to be it was really easy to figure out what you were going to recover from a DR perspective, right? If you had a fire, you fail over the servers that are crispy. If you have a flood, you fail over the servers that are drippy, right? So it was always usually pretty easy. Okay, these are the boxes that have to be reinstantiated first, and then you just prioritize based on the workloads that were housed inside of them. The problem is all those cyber events; those boxes still have blinky lights, right? They still look right. They're not drippy. They're not crispy, and so you got to take a detour to figure out which ones actually still need to be remediated versus not. But after that, we go right back to, okay, now we know which boxes are pseudo crispy drippy. Let's go ahead and fail over from that. But then, of course, the other thing that you've highlighted here is not all organizations have a DR site. Right now, you and I, we're fans of the dual data center model, right? So in the United States, East Coast to West Coast, or maybe more like, Northeast to Arizona, out of the same geography, out of the same weather pattern. We love those. If you're tuning in from Australia or APJ as an example, Sydney to Perth, that's money. If you're in Europe, London to Nice, right? Bring it down to southern France, because if you're going to have a really cruddy recovery, at least you can do is do it from a beach, right? I mean, you want that dual data center approach along the way. But mid-sized organizations, commercial organizations, often don't have a secondary site. So that's, I think, part of what you get from DRaaS. But I think you and I would agree the better thing you get out of DRaaS are smart people to help you. Can we kind of riff on that a little bit?
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the other things that we've always kind of started to think about, right, is the people, So you made a good point earlier, actually on a few weeks back on a conversation you and I had about, hey, well, if you want to know how well your business continuity or disaster recovery plan is going to go, just take the smartest guy out of the room that knows everything that there is to know about the data center, kick them out, and then let's get everybody else in the room and figure out if they know what the process looks like, right? And that's very much so what it looks like here. When you subscribe to a service provider or somebody else that can help you work through all those different processes, especially when you start to think about, if you've never gone through a disaster recovery effort before, if you've never done a tabletop exercise, well, now you have access to experts that this is what they live, they breathe, this is all that they do, right? So it's their job to help you be as successful as you possibly could be. So yeah, absolutely. People also becomes part of that process, and that's something you have to identify, and you have to know who are the right people that need to be part of maintaining and hitting these SLAs for the business.
Really, really well said. I just, when I think about process, and, if I have a server that goes down in Dallas and it wakes up in Arizona, right, that is not a trivial exercise unless you're using Veeam. But anyway, and that's going to kind of lead us into the technology piece. So now we know, yes, cyber should be part of the DR strategy. Yes, you should be thinking about, okay, where are you going to recover to? And do you have the plumbing and the expertise to do that? Let's break down the next piece of, as you were unpacking what's in the average BCDR plan or not, what else did you see?
Yeah, so I mean, again, right, same question, but then now we're just highlighting all those processes that customers are going through, and they're identifying the types of technology that they can leverage or that can be available for data recovery. So offsite backups to cloud storage, I mean, that's a great example, right? Everybody should be in some way, shape, or form leveraging some type of cloud for getting your data offsite, out of that perimeter that could possibly cause some other type of outage, right? Regardless if it's ransomware, if there's flood, if there's a fire, if there's a natural disaster, that data center is cratered, you need to have your backups off site, and cloud storage is a great way to do it. Replication from on-site to a cloud service, again, just taking copies, moving that data off going into, again, that cloud service, leveraging that service provider. Replication one site to the other, something that you and I just talked about, right? Being a big fan of having that secondary DR. And then offsite backups via tape. Tape is still very relevant. It is the original immutable air-gapped device that customers can leverage to write their backups to it and cannot be deleted, right? So we still have customers that are leveraging tape, and you know what? I'm fine with that. I used to work with a customer that wrote over 4 petabytes of backups into tape, and guess what? They never had one bad day of not being able to recover when they needed it the most. So tape is very much still so relevant. So I think here we had that great idea. Here we've identified some of the top technologies that we can leverage to help us when we need to perform that data recovery.
So one of the other things I love about this particular data point and how you've collected all the different ways of get your data out of the building, right? I mean, that's the punchline here is the first thing, is we want to figure out the what, the why and the what. The next thing is get your data out of the building somehow, some way. And I would argue if you add these numbers up, it's well more than 100%. There is more than one good way to get your data out of the building. And I love that. Hey, we got a comment from Rick in one of the social media feeds. You know what? I have known Rick actually for got to be close to 10 years now. And he continues to have just nice, easy mic drop moments. You and I have already talked about the idea of, hey, take the smartest person in the room, take them out of the room. But Rick raised that to another level because what he suggests is have the most junior person be in charge of the exercise. So now, not only are you removing the crutch of having the smart person just know it all in their head, it has to be on paper, but now you've created a mentoring or coaching opportunity. And in theory, you have that junior person start to grow it enough times, they become a senior person. And now we have redundancy. See what I'm doing there? Redundancy in our expertise. So please keep the other best practices and comments coming. But great ad from Rick along the way. Okay, so let's finish this up, right? So we've got, we know where the data is going to go. We know the range of disasters is bigger than we think. We know we have survivable data outside the building. And bring it home.
Validating policies. I think this is the biggest portion that I would say most users take it to that point of, okay, we know how to do backups. We have our recovery options in place. We know how to do recoveries because we have had to do a restore of a server, and we think that's going to be sufficient. But the next portion of having true data disaster recovery business continuity planning is identifying how those policies work and how you're going to validate those to implement your SLAs, right? So top 2 things on here: policy on testing recovery of multiple workloads at scale, and policy on auditing and updating that BCDR documentation, because we all know, I know, sitting many different types of meetings with different customers, I have sat through the screenshots of, let's go ahead and screenshot this particular workload, or let's go ahead and add this to the Word doc. And we did this all 3 years ago. When are your plans to update it? We don't know, right? So making sure you have up-to-date disaster recovery BCDR documentation is going to be the number 1 way for you to be able to recover easier. But also number 2, when you have that junior SME that you're trying to train and mentor, right? Train them on best practices on actually creating and updating documentation, because that's going to help them in the long run.
Preach, Ms. Tellez. Preach. Preach it. Yeah. I cannot say enough how important documentation and testing is on this one. In fact, just before the live stream went live, we were both struggling with something that both of us used to know exactly how to do. We were trying to right-click on a UI, and the button wasn't there anymore. And I can tell you, 2 months ago, that button was a functioning feature, and now it wasn't. And if that was part of our DR plan, the technical term is we'd be screwed. But that is not how that turned out. All right, so one of the things we started to do in a lot of these video series is to try to really bring home, okay, if you're going to take a screenshot, if you're going to remember what is the main thing, let's talk through the main thing, and then we're going to pivot on. We're actually running a little long just because this first one was so interesting, but we got a few more things we want to talk about today. So we said we were going to do 5 things. Are these the first 3?
These are the first 3, right? These are the first 3 takeaways that every customer, every user should be thinking about. one, you have to solve for ransomware preparedness, right? So your BCDR plan has to include some type of cyber inside of it.
Yep.
You need to think about data mobility, right? If we are going to be moving data from one site to our secondary DR or co-location, or maybe if we are going to be using a hyperscaler like an AWS or an Azure, what does that process look like when you are there in the cloud? And maybe how do you get back out of the cloud, right? Or are you just going to set it all there and now 100% be a cloud only customer, right? And
disaster should not be a forced migration strategy. That is not a core best practice. All right, but let's talk about some of the other things. So we've got this model, we've got this method down. Some of the other questions that were actually new for 2024's data protection trends report is for folks that are doing the kinds of things that you prescribe, Emilee. One of the things that they asked this year was the last time that you did do a test, right? Because testing's important. We talked about that, and like 37% of folks agree. The last time that you did a test, how did it go? I'm going to riff on this for just 1 second. So the stat on the left says 58% of your servers came back when they were in the expectations that you had. Now remember, SLA is not an industry term, right? Or it's an industry term. There's not an industry measure. So if you say, I need everything back in 2 hours or 4 hours or 6 hours or 30 minutes, that's what the business says it needs, and the IT team has agreed upon. That's the A in SLA, is an agreement of what those service levels need to be. So once the business unit leaders and the IT team have agreed on what those expectations are, they didn't hit their own KPI in 2 out of 5 cases, right? If 58% did make it, that unfortunately means 42% did not. I was on a podcast about this with a folks yesterday, and I said, I got a kid in college right now. She came home and said, hey, Dad, I got a 58 on my last exam. Unless it's out of 50 and she got extra credit, I am not interested in a 58. Now, she's actually a fantastic student, so that actually is more plausible. But that is not a passing grade for IT. And let's talk about why is it that it looks like this? And I think we've got some insights that might help folks.
Yeah. Number one is going to be orchestration, automation, and planning, right? So the nice...
Wait. If that's number one, you'd think more people would do it.
Yeah, you would think so, right? So 13% actually said that they have the ability to orchestrate a full recovery during disaster, right? The majority of customers that are also saying that, well, we could probably do a recovery, but it's going to be leveraged using scripts, or we're having to manually update it ourselves, right? That's not orchestrated recovery. That is probably more than likely why you are failing your test, because you're having to find out during the testing process, or maybe during a moment of crisis when you need the data the most, that now you cannot meet those SLAs that you have established from the business, right? So this is why testing automation becomes super important, because if you're going to gauge what your SLA is going to be, this is a perfect way to be able to know, are you going to be able to hit those SLAs? Are you going to be able to get that passing score grade, right? 58% is not passing. We want to start aiming for those 80s and those 90s to be able to say that we can get data, we can get our business back up on time.
Yeah, there's 2 ways that I think I would, if you're taking screenshots, this is actually a pretty good one to take a screenshot on. And the reason is not just because of the dichotomy between the 58 and the 42, right? But I think there's 2 things that come to mind. One, when you orchestrate, you can start to test this along the way, so you can figure out what your number is. The other thing is, depending on whether you use orchestration or not, 58 is either a bad, scary number, or actually a really good, empowering number. And I'm going to be the optimist on this one. And that is, if you are using orchestration, so for 13% of you that are using workflows, if you're using orchestration, then the recovery is going to happen the same way every time. So you now know the 58% of your orchestrated workflows that will result in a successful recovery. That also means you now know the 42% of workloads that you got to go look at fixing, right? What is it that broke? Was it didn't rename the IP address? I have lost weekends because somebody said the servers were all on DHCP. It had fixed IP address ranges, and it didn't wake up on the same subnet. Everything was working. You just couldn't talk to it, right? Yeah. So if you have orchestrated workflows, that's 1 out of 8 of you. Then you now know the 42% to improve on. It's kind of like I've been taking certification exams for 30 some odd years, right? I don't want to know how long you've been doing them for. Anyway, you get these passing scores on sections, and once you know you can reliably pass this section, you focus on what you got to do better down here, right? And that's where that 42% starts to get down into next month it's 30, and then it's 20, and then it's 10, and all of a sudden, now you are passing your SLAs, which more importantly, your organization will actually be able to recover on their worst day. Can I get an amen?
Amen. No, I absolutely agree. That's, one of the things I used to tell some of my customers is Veeam or orchestration will always shine a spotlight on one of the processes that might be broken, right? Is it infrastructure? Is it resources? Is it a workload? Is it a person, right? It's going to shine a spotlight into where are some things that we can help to make improvements so that way we can increase those percentage points to make sure that, we're passing flying colors. So it's a really good thing to have. Again, automating your workloads, it's just going to help you be better in the long run.
Hey, I got to give a nod to Kalyan. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Excellent session, very good insights. Thank you so much. I got to give full credit on this one to Emily. We're going to cover about 6 of her slides today. In the deck that she gave me earlier this week, there were 40 slides. And so 30 minutes is not going to do her competency justice. And so we're going to go figure out how to do a whole webinar and really make this stuff even more actionable. But hats off to the guest for today. Okay, so this is for those organizations that have run a test. One of the other questions that was in the data protection trends report on this was, hey, even if you haven't, how long do you think it would take? And I think it's interesting because the ask is you got to fail over 50 servers, right? All of the respondents this year were enterprises, 1,000 users or more. So 50 servers is not a lot of server. That's like 3 virtualization hosts with all their VMs, right? Or 2 racks if you're physical. I was surprised by this. What did you see out of this? Because this looks icky.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. When you start looking at it, 68% more than a week. You could take into account, okay, if we're thinking about it from a cyber perspective, okay, then our SLA goes out of the window because now we got to think about the process of what needs to happen if we think that we've been hit by some type of malware or cyber event. So I understand that, but if we just look at it from like a straight disaster data recovery, 32% businesses in a week, I can guarantee you those 32% are probably the ones that have the automation portion and are leveraging some type of orchestration to be able to recover faster than what the others were. So, I mean, it's not surprising that more than half, right, or 68%, it's going to take them longer to recover those 50 servers because like we saw, only 1 out of 8 is only actually using true orchestration and automation. So those 68% are probably having to test and validate and probably having to fix a lot of things on the fly when they are having to perform those recoveries.
The other thing I would just kind of point out is usually when you ask IT folks like this a question of how long do you think something would take, usually IT folks are optimists. Yeah. So this might actually be a best case scenario, and that might be the worst part of that data. All right, I could talk to you all day long. We don't have time, so we got 6 minutes. We're going to pop through a couple really quick things. Summarize this one out for us because I know we have one more big thing we want to talk to today.
Yeah, I think number 1 is getting data offsite and improving your reliability with testing, right? Those are going to be the things that you need to make sure that you're doing to ensure that you're going to be able to be part of that 13% or even grow that percentage.
All right. And now lastly, we've talked, kind of flirted with the idea of cyber for a majority of this series. So let's remind folks, right? So you said your opening comment, in fact, was that the most common thing now part of a BCDR strategy is to include cyber preparedness or cyber resiliency, depending on you're an optimist or pessimist, into your overall comprehensive DR plan. Here's a stat that we shared a couple weeks ago, and just in the spirit of time, I want to get through this one, but the things that I think were really Super scary. Organizations were asked how many times did they suffer a cyber event over the previous 12 months. Only 1 in 4 believe they were not hit, right? Now, even if they're all right, that means 3 out of 4 got hit 1 or more times. That is already too scary. You and I, if we had more time, could riff on the fact that not all of them are right. Some of them, the bad actor is already in the environment. They just haven't been asked for the ransom yet, or the arson. So, but best case, 25% were not hit in the last 12 months. And if you add up the reds over here, more than that, 26% were hit 4 or more times, with the punchline being more organizations were hit quarterly by a successful cyber breach than not hit at all. And this stat would be scary on its own. But you and I talk a lot about off thread on there is a challenge in our market, especially some of the other backup vendors in the space who say, we're not backup vendors, we're cyber resiliency vendors, right? And they are so mindful of cyber, right? And that's like saying, hey, we're going to always protect you from fire. And then you wonder why, when there's a water main break, your servers are unprotected against flood, right? Mm-hmm. If you overly focus on one problem, you run the risk of being underprotected for all the other problems that still occur. Last slide for the day. Let's talk about all the other problems that still matter.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like you could see here, right? You need to solve for one problem. Well, A, you need to solve for all problems, but B, including of the other ones that are really big picture that, it's on top of everybody's mind right now. So, I mean, cybersecurity, obviously that got the #1 spot, but let's start looking at the other pieces. Infrastructure, network outage, stuff still breaks, right? We still have accidental deletions. We still have application or software outage, either due to a bad patch update. There's still outage of public cloud resources, right? There's still so many other things that can occur that can cause an outage to your infrastructure. And if you're not solving for those, which could be more commonly to occur than the cyber one, then you're not going to be able to recover. You're not going to be able to maintain those SLAs. So these are some of the things, that, again, I like to stress to a lot of the customers that I talk to is, okay, we're solving for cyber, but have we thought about A, B, C, D, E, all the other things that could possibly go wrong inside of your data center besides this? Because I can tell you, I've had more calls, or I've had maybe the same amount of calls with customers that have been hit by a cyber event versus ones that were, hey, we had a bad update. Or sure. Our barbecue caught on fire and it set half the data center on fire.
True story.
There are things like that happen, right? Those are just common occurrences, and you have to plan for those.
For our April 2nd episode, we're going to be talking about some of the worst stories that folks have. I have to find pictures. We actually had a deer walk into a data center in Colorado because they had the sliding windows open and it was really pretty and there's a great view. The deer got freaked out and started kicking racks. Turns out hoofs will take out a server just as much as a bad patch. So we're going to talk about it. But here's the takeaway, right? So, yeah, you should solve for cyber. But what I hope you heard from the very first thing we talked about, cyber is in many ways a superset of the kinds of other crises that can also bring down servers. So if you're solving for cyber, that doesn't mean that hard drives don't fail, that patches don't break, that users don't do silly stuff. Right. So just make sure that you've got the entire thing out there. This has been fantastic. We have to do a webcast on this because like half of your stuff didn't make today's session. So for that, our dear friends, Rick, who had some of the opening comments, as well as Julia and Matt, are going to be coming from KubeCon in Paris, which is so much better than being in 2 home offices, even if it is the same color beige. But they're going to be on the Thursday show talking about KubeCon and some of the stuff coming around Kubernetes along the way. Dear, I do have pictures, Nirav. I really do. All right. Other than that, let's just bring up the screen one last time. We've got a QR code. I think this is technically the last installment in the DPR series. So if you haven't already downloaded the full report, the QR code should be on your screen. Please go and download the full report overall. And if you have questions, you can reach out to strategicresearch@veeam.com. If I can't answer them, I'll ask Em, and she can pile on. So Emilee, again, thanks for joining. Thanks for bringing your real world experience to the show. For everyone else watching, be safe and be prepared, because disasters are bad. And yeah, disasters are bad. Have a great day.
Thanks.